There's some big old problems in your Genesis stories as far as the creation of man, the plants, and the animals. Now, most of this discussion, people will render one of two different options. But we're going to cover many different things as far as this is concerned. And one of those options that many people will go with is the fact that in the Genesis 1 account, it is given an overview of what this God is going to do. And in Genesis 2 is given the specifics as far as the creation of man, the plants, and the animals. But those answers are not sufficient in order for you to truly understand what is actually going on here historically. Historically, when you look at these two texts, chapter 1 and chapter 2, one of the things you have to recognize is that the Leningrad Codex, which was written in around 1000 to 800 BCE in Proto-Hebrew, was then not in its final edition until between 500 to 400 BCE in the biblical Hebrew. Therefore, you have centuries of time that goes by with different writers from different political perspectives. One during the perspective when Israelite was forming itself into its own kingdom in the north, as well as being beset by the Chaldeans and the Assyrians. And then in the later biblical Hebrew, it was written during the Babylonian captivity. So there's a different political mindset and a different agenda that is at hand. But we're going to take a few minutes to look at it, and we're going to break down a few other things as far as whether or not a day equals 24 hours compared to what people see in Psalms or in Peter, where it says that a day to man is like 1,000 years to God. And we're going to break down why those things are simply not true. Now, one of the first things, as in my video that I produced earlier today, where I talked about did Yahweh create a flat earth or did he lie, I briefly mentioned and talked about the doctrine of accommodation that was put forth by two gentlemen. First by St. Augustine, who existed in and around the 4th century BCE, and then by John Calvin, who existed in the 1500s, who both spoke as far as God knew the scientific level and understanding of man was too low for him to understand exactly how things actually exist in the cosmos, and therefore he accommodated man by giving him something that he could understand based on his current level of technology and his cultural biases. But we know that these types of mentality cannot hold forth for a God who is supposed to be omnipresent and all-knowing, because that merely creates confusion, and this is supposed to be not a God of confusion. But back to what we were talking about. According to Genesis chapter 1, which was most likely written by the Elohists, and the reason why they're called the Elohists is because they use the terminology to describe this God as Elohim, where when we look at chapter 2, we're going to see that they call this God Yahweh, which is most likely written by those who they call the Yahwists. So you're going to have two different perspectives just based on the linguistic use of the name Elohim and Yahweh, which Elohim representing the one masterful God or gods or goddesses all bundled into one, and Yahweh being the Canaanite deity who is the son of Elion, and the son of Elion and Asherah, who then he later marries Asherah. But in Genesis chapter 1, it expressly says that on the 6th day of creation, that this God brought forth all the living creatures on the land and all the plant life on the land. And then it says in verse 26, then God said. The then indicates that this is something that is happening after something else had just happened. So therefore, the plants and the animals were created prior to Adam being created. But yet it is not expressing just Adam here. It is expressing Adam and Eve, or men and women, and it doesn't give a certain number of men and women that were created, but a long list of people that were created at this time frame that is unidentifiable. So is it 2 people, or is it 15 people, 30 people, a million people? But what we can tell from this is that they were all created, male and female, at the exact same time. That there is no separation of time between the creation of Adam and Eve, or should I say man and woman, but that they were all created at the exact same time. Now, to say that chapter 2 is breaking it down to more specific would go against how chapter 2 starts, because it starts by saying that this God had created everything and saw that everything was good. So everything was completed. Things weren't done as a metaphor, nor were things done as a pre-planning stage for what he's actually supposedly going to do, but that all these things were complete and all these things were created. And then it goes on to say that in the day that the Lord created the heavens, the earth, and the heavens, that there were no plants, that there were no animals, that there was nothing on the ground, because this God made a mistake and had not made it rain. We all know that rain is very crucial to the existence of life on the planet, because without rain, rivers and lakes and ponds dry up, and even the ocean would dry up, since the sun and the moon were created on the fourth day. So therefore, there is none. There is nothing around. So this God made a mistake, basically. But one thing I want to hit before we continue in this aspect of it is the fact that here it says, in the day of the Lord. In the day of the Lord, in the Hebrew, it is Beyom, B-E-Y-O-M, which means an extended period of time. It is speaking in this instance as far as the 6 days of creation and the 7th day of rest. So it is talking about an extended period of time. In the Hebrew text, there is a significant difference, and you can pause this to read it for yourself. There is a significant difference between the word yom and the word bayom. Bayom is that extended period of time, in the day, meaning a time frame, whereas yom means the daylight hours or a 24-hour day, which it expressed that all these things happen in a 24-hour day. Now, the accommodation argument would suggest that because man only could understand 24-hour days, that this God wrote it in such a way so that man could understand it. But that just yet created confusion, because later in Psalms and in Peter, he says that one day to man is like 1,000 years to God, which would be a bayom, which would be a long extended period of time. So therefore, in the first creations of Genesis, where it goes 1 day, 2 day, 3 day, 4 day, it is speaking of a yom. And here in this one, you can pause as well. It demonstrates all the things that happen in those creations based on each day, and the differences of how they looked at God in those time frames, and the perception of man of creating an unidentified number of man, compared to Genesis 2, when they create one man and then a woman. But it still identifies a yom as one single day and not an extended period of time, as well as this brings in the anthropomorphized God and the spiritual version of God. Now back to chapter 2. In chapter 2, it says that on this day after the 7 days of creation, the 6 days of creation and the 1 day of rest, that this God then created man, created Adam out of the ground, out of the dust, as a single individual, as a single being. But this creation of Adam is saying that man was made before plants and animals, and that only one single man was made, and not this unidentifiable number of man that was supposedly made on the 6th day in chapter 1. And then it goes on to say that man was not made to be alone. He couldn't find a good helpmate. So then this God made all the plants, after he missed the earth, made all the plants come up, and then formed all the animals in front of Adam to see what he would call them in seeking a helpmeet for man. Sounds like a little bestiality to me, but hey, a helpmeet is a helpmeet, right? But that identifies that plants and animals then were created after Adam was created, going in contradiction to what Genesis chapter 1 said. And then it says that since a helpmeet could not be found from man, bestiality, then he caused the man to go into a sleep and pluck from his rib, and from his rib he made Eve, whereas Genesis chapter 1 verse 26 expressly said that man and woman were made at the exact same time and told to be fruitful and multiply and subdue the earth. So in this instance, what we really are seeing is two different people at two different times, separated by centuries, writing creation stories and trying to edit it to make it fit. This just shows that man wrote the Bible, not this God, and it was not divinely inspired. So y'all have a great day, and always remember, you have to free yourself to be yourself, because your greatness is not